Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something truly fascinating. We're looking at a legendary retro game, Dragon Warrior 3. But we're not just talking about it as some piece of classic entertainment. We're actually exploring it as a profound psychological sandbox. This is really the story of how a profoundly gifted child processes incredibly complex systems, navigates trauma, and builds resilience, all through a mythic journey that was born right there in the quiet hum of a CRT screen. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our map for today's journey. First, we'll look at the descent into darkness. Then, frameworks of a gifted mind. Third, we'll cover the burden of silent heroism. Fourth is navigating existential dread, and we'll wrap it all up with the mythic ascension.
Section 1. The Descent into Darkness.
To really understand this journey, we have to first understand the mind of a profoundly gifted child. Think of their mind like a vast ocean beneath a perfectly still surface. You know, most children learn about the world in fragments, right? Slowly, gently, step by step. But the profoundly gifted child, they arrive already awake. For them, it isn't just about learning faster than everyone else. It's an absolute adventure imperative. They actively seek out the mazes, the complex quests, the dark forests. And they don't do it for the glory. They do it because the challenge of the unknown is just utterly irresistible to them. Which brings us to a really crucial question, one that kind of challenges our basic assumptions about childhood. What drives a gifted mind to willingly descend into the dark? Like, why wouldn't a mind that extraordinary just wait for a nice, gentle staircase to be built for them? Why go actively searching for a dangerous rope to climb down? Well, the text argues that a gifted young soul doesn't wait around for permission to explore what's difficult. They dive in head first because the friction, the challenge itself, is the entire point. They walk into worlds that other people are terrified of simply because they're built for exactly that kind of pressure.
Now, in Dragon Warrior 3, the world of darkness wasn't just some standard map to explore. It was presented as a literal cosmic abyss. I mean, picture this. You've got this tiny Game Boy Color screen, which, let's be honest, you were probably squinting at in the back of a dark car on a road trip, and it's just completely swallowed by a gaping black pit. And how do you get into it? It's not through some grand, triumphant gate. You go down a single, fragile-looking rope hanging in a tiny corner of that abyss. It's this massive visual metaphor for a brave, willing descent into existential danger. To take that path, you first have to fundamentally believe you have the strength to hold on, and you have to trust that the rope isn't going to break as you descend way past the point where the light reaches.
Section 2. Frameworks of a Gifted Mind.
Dragon Quest III was a world that absolutely punished the arrogant and crushed the unprepared. Surviving it didn't just take button mashing, it literally demanded the mind of a general, a philosopher, and a warrior, all at once. And what's so incredible here is that the young player we're analyzing met this massive challenge using raw, untaught intellect, intuitively building these highly complex mental frameworks. We see this methodological data perfectly illustrated in how they handled the game's party system. The child assembled what the text calls the sacred party composition. You have the hero right there as the anchor. Then Sage 1, giving you complete mastery of both black and white magic. Sage 2 is there because, well, redundancy equals resilience, meaning the party is never going to run dry on healing or destruction. And finally, a thief, for speed, stealth, and finding those crucial hidden doors. This isn't just trivial gaming trivia, guys. This is actual proof of a child intuitively mastering resource management and cognitive role theory without any guide or manual. No one taught them this. They just looked at the system and understood it.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible precision it implies, much like a chess grandmaster. The child built this team by essentially reading the unreadable. They were finding the signal in the noise where everyone else just heard chaos. They were playing 3 moves ahead, and they realized a really profound truth about complex systems early on. Game failure is not defeat. Actually, scratch that, it's more like failure is vital data. Every single time they lost, it wasn't a reason to quit. It was just new information used to refine the strategy.
And all of this strategic mastery eventually culminated in the use of one very specific spell, Thordarin. It's this crackling, devastating column of divine lightning that is entirely exclusive to the hero. But the text notes something super important here. To actually cast it, you had to possess deep wisdom. You had to thoroughly understand pacing. You had to practice strict MP conservation, and you had to survive long enough to unleash your absolute greatest power only when the dungeon's darkness was at its absolute deepest. Think about the immense amount of patience and emotional regulation that requires from a young mind. It's astounding.
Section 3. The Burden of Silent Heroism. So, this brings us to a profoundly unsettling encounter in the game. It's the bosstroll, an ancient evil that's secretly masquerading as the king using a hand mirror. Now, in your standard RPG, uncovering a massive deception like this comes with a ton of fanfare. You'd get dramatic cutscenes, deep lore dumps, maybe a shiny new magic sword, the whole shebang. But the reality of this specific boss troll encounter in Dragon Warrior 3, it is an absolute void. It was a completely silent impersonation. There's no narrative scaffolding holding your hand. You just had to sneak into the castle at night, sense that something was deeply wrong in the air, defeat the ancient evil, and just leave. The game deliberately strips away all those standard narrative rewards to force the hero to rely purely on their own instinct.
This kind of empty, rewardless design perfectly mirrors a really harsh real-world reality. As the quote notes, sometimes you walk away with no reward, no transformation, no new ability, just the quiet knowledge that you did what had to be done. I mean, that resonates so deeply with anyone who has ever had to endure a toxic environment, confront a hidden antagonist, or keep other people safe in secret. You literally gain nothing from it, except the incredibly heavy burden of knowing you did what you had to do. Section 4. Navigating Existential Dread.
As the game progresses, it deliberately shifts away from that fun sense of adventure into this feeling of crushing existential inevitability. And the design elements they use to achieve this are just meticulously crafted. When the world turns dark, the screen literally dims. The vibrant colors flatten out into these cold blues and blacks, and the maps suddenly feel utterly, hauntingly empty. The music shifts into this minor key isolating loop. Even when you're flying on Lamia, the legendary creature, the flight music isn't triumphant anymore. It becomes high-pitched, lonely, and slightly dissonant. These choices weren't just made to be spooky, they were brilliantly crafted to create this suffocating atmosphere of lonely heroism. It literally felt like you were walking alone in a dying world, and a sensitive, gifted mind felt that symbolic descent on a profoundly deep level.
And that leads us to a crucial point, beautifully captured in this insight. You weren't scared because you were weak. You were scared because you were perceptive. Let that sink in for a second. Recognizing the emotional truth, the loneliness, and the sheer isolation of navigating a poisonous land isn't a flaw. It's actually a marker of true mythic heroism. Real heroes feel the terrifying weight of the darkness, and they push forward anyway, simply because they must.
Section 5. The Mythic Ascension.
By the end of this journey, the child didn't just complete a really difficult retro video game, they basically enacted a literal rite of passage towards the final confrontation at Zoma's castle. Let's move to and see how this builds through 3 final incredibly mythic beats. First, you have to summon Lamia, which proves your ultimate mastery over the elemental forces. Second, you cross the poisonous lands. Notice you don't walk through them, you fly over the corruption, refusing to let it stay in your heart. And finally, you enter the castle and literally walk across the light-damaged floor. It's a barrier designed to reject the unworthy. Making it across that floor proves the player was inherently worthy of Loto's legendary equipment. They didn't just find it, they qualified for it through pure courage and resolve.
Which brings us to this absolutely beautiful, defining conclusion. When the child finally reached the absolute bottom of that fragile little rope we talked about at the beginning, and they faced the final darkness, it turns out it wasn't dark anymore. Why? Because their mind was always ready. The hero didn't slowly grow into their capability. They walked into the abyss already holding the keys. They brought their own light into the dark to completely defeat Zoma's despair.
We've unpacked a lot today. We've looked closely at how a gifted mind intuitively navigates complex systems, how they process failure purely as data, and how they silently carry the incredibly heavy burden of unthanked heroism. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from our analysis. What unseen heroic burdens are you quietly carrying in your own life right now? And if you have the courage to grasp it, where does your rope lead? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive explainer. Keep climbing, and whatever you do, keep bringing your own light into the dark.